Friends, welcome to the Summary Club of the Learning and Self-Development Portal. Today we will have an even more interesting, informative and controversial topic than usual. In fact, the Self-Development Portal is just flooded with interesting questions on dozens of unusual topics, and some of them really surprise and perplex even us. As you may know, after a series of brief reviews of the world's major religions and teachings from the usual Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, all the way to mystical shamanism, sexy tantra, ever-blowing Rastafarianism and even dark Satanism, almost all of which make it to the top of YouTube searches, it seems we can hardly be surprised, but today we have to go even deeper down the rabbit hole. Right at the crossroads of mysticism, religion, history, biology, chemistry, poison science, and even, oddly enough, narcology. Yes, the fact is that especially after our big documentary about rapeseed and Amazonian jungle medicine, we have been asked much more often about various, so to speak, power plants, as well as about our local analogs of such esoteric and mystical plants, but most often, oddly enough lately, about the usual poisonous mushrooms, fly agarics. Yes, you heard right, about common fly agarics, which, unlike the exotic plants of the Amazon or Peru, grows in almost every forest in any country. But what is so unusual about them? Seemingly ordinary poisonous mushrooms which many avoid, otherwise there is a risk of poisoning after collecting and using these mushrooms. But not everything is so simple, because we still decided to take up this topic, and indeed today in short and non-boring language we will tell you literally everything that is worth knowing about such not simple mushrooms, fly agarics, about their, as some claim, medicinal, stimulating and hallucinogenic action, and maybe even about a certain enlightenment and spiritual development, and at the same time and together with this, the possible negative consequences and risks of poisoning of the organism and mental disorders after their use. But first, let's answer the main question of why, especially in recent years, this particular topic is gaining in popularity. If these mushrooms are so bad and poisonous, as we were taught in our childhood by our grandmothers and teachers at school, then why today many YouTube videos simply with the word fly agaric gain tens, if not hundreds of thousands and sometimes even many millions of views? What is the reason for such popularity? After all, given the number of YouTube users, the statistics show that almost every 10th person over the past year has watched and discussed videos on fly agarics, and thousands of people watch and discuss them every day. That is, it turns out, it is almost a new trend, in some places overshadowing the widespread discussion of COVID and other acute social topics. And so, what is so unusual about fly agarics, and why they are discussed almost more often than politics? What is such a widespread fascination of most ordinary people with poisonous mushrooms, and maybe even some, as some call them, enlightening plants of power, which from time immemorial were really used by our distant ancestors, and in general, apparently, most of the half of the progressive mankind since time immemorial? And so we begin, having dug a little, or rather a lot, both in scientific and alternative and esoteric literature, we can make a confident conclusion that the statements and our subconscious fears about the super-lethal danger and poisonousness of fly agaric mushrooms, indeed, greatly exaggerated. In this case, and the red mushroom fly agaric, and many other species in most directories are indeed in the group of the most dangerous and poisonous mushrooms, so officially collect them is not strictly recommended and even conditionally prohibited, but here it is known to all with pictures, the classic red mushroom fly agaric with white speckles. It turns out with a reasonable and proper preparation of many even modern educated people isn't only edible, but also surprisingly useful. Moreover, a fact is really confirmed, that representatives of many, literally dozens of advanced ancient cultures considered this mushroom as almost the most medicinal and mystical plant of all existing plants. And it was believed that with the right dosage Agaric can cure as usual diseases of the body, and even heal the spirit and a certain human soul, if of course you believe in it. Well, about the soul, of course, this is not accurate and is not yet scientifically provable, but what can be said for sure is that the Agaric was indeed one of the most sacred and healing plants in many ancient civilizations, if not in all of them. The whole page would not be enough just to enumerate where, by whom, and how it was used. The medicinal properties of Agaric were used by herbalists at least for healing epilepsy, tuberculosis, leukemia, nervous disorders, cramps, depression, for heart disease, pressure, varicose veins, to relieve colic and increase immunity. Infusions took away muscle spasms, relieved addictions, headaches and joint pain, treated wounds and skin diseases, fought parasites, relieved insomnia and even, believe it or not, improved potency. And that's not all, it was so versatile that it helped even with trivial angina, cough, any swelling, and as a general anti-inflammatory agent. In the army it has no equal, because in the right proportion it gives a man physical strength and endurance, acts as an energy drink, and also promotes healing, and in large quantities it can make an experienced warrior a real fighting machine, which even alone can destroy dozens of enemies in a matter of seconds. In general, real tanks and fighting machines of antiquity, which sometimes could decide the outcome of even an entire battle, sowing panic in the enemy's army. Most often the fierce Vikings, who thanks to their fearless warriors, berserkers, and the general toughness and endurance of their men conquered at one time almost half of the known world at that time. Also well-known cartoons Asterix and Obelix, for example, tell about the time when the Celts and Druids of Europe used Agarics in their potions, quite successfully helping their relatively small Gallic armies to successfully fight against the strongest Roman army at the time. Although in Greece and Babylon, and later in Rome, also knew and used these plants in their sacred rituals and mysteries, which we do not understand today. And even in Russia these mushrooms were kept as amulets against the influence of evil forces at the Vedic altar. And in the ancient Indian Rigveda generally mentions such wonderful drink as soma or nectar of the gods, which also, apparently, was prepared from Agaric plants. And yes, of course, this is all in the past and most of the ancient recipes have been lost, but even today, the most famous of the remaining shamans of the north also continue to actively use these mushrooms in their ceremonies and mystical practices, doing about the same as in many thousands of years before them. Especially if you believe the known rock drawings of Agaric mushrooms, which certainly exist and clearly indicate an extremely ancient origin of their use, lost in the centuries, already existed from the oldest known history, including the active use and in times of the Mayans, and also, as everywhere these mushrooms were used not only in mystical, today we are not very clear purposes, but also in purely applied medicine and healing. So with so many facts it is already obvious that with the Agaric mushroom not everything is as simple as written in the handbooks of young mushroom pickers. And probably today there are no healers or mystics who haven't heard about some mystical and miraculous power of this plant. This is the most recognizable mushroom in the world, and hints about its powers and properties are contained in a huge number of various films, books, and even in children's cartoons. And indeed, the idea that red and white mushrooms can transform and endow with some magical power is found even in the game about the Mario Brothers, as well as in all the famous children's mystery book Alice in Wonderland, and in general, probably in almost a third of fairy tales and illustrations of children's books, associating us with the world of fairy tales, imagination and magic since childhood. And this, again, only the tip of the iceberg and only children's literature, because those who are in the subject of esotericism and self-development know that since the early 60s, when the world was flooded with a wave of esoteric search and admiration for shamanic plants, fly agaric mushroom or Amanita muscaria scientifically came to the fore. There were also peyote cacti, which were colorfully described by the legendary Carlos Castaneda, but of course they were completely inaccessible to most esoteric practitioners, so the world was even more interested in the much more accessible red fly agaric and some other species. After that, numerous researchers and enthusiasts began to study the magical and medical features of the fly agaric. Desperate daredevils traveled in whole groups to distant Siberian expeditions, as well as to the tundra and Canadian wilds, to find out from the wild aborigines their secret properties. The adventurers wished to discover recipes for preparing mushrooms for mystical shamanistic ceremonies and spiritual quests. The world in general was already then practically going crazy, drawn into the esoteric wave of shamanic revelations. So the search for shamanic plants of power has been almost an international movement associated with human self-discovery and some spiritual insight since those times. The red fly agaric is the real star of shamanic practices, not inferior to Castaneda's peyote practitioner in almost anything. And besides, most importantly, its use is absolutely legal, unlike most other similar plants of power, prohibited by law in almost every country in the world. So it is the red fly agaric, now considered among esotericists as one of the main natural means of expanded knowledge of reality, a kind of mushrooms of the force, giving orders to the human mind to be silent, and giving instead of this noise, concentrated will and emptiness of thought. It is believed that the strength and merits of this particular mushroom is that when used in reasonable dosage, it doesn't distort the worldview and awareness of a person, but it gives those seeking knowledge to change spiritually forever. And yes, all of this can indeed combine together in theory, which is how we will discuss further. He is said to be like the wizard of the Emerald City, giving strength and vigor to the tired, peace and equilibrium to the anxious, to the sick its medicine and hope for recovery, and for those who have chosen the path of development and self-knowledge it is a most powerful plant of strength and an ally on the spiritual path as well. But this is all theory. So let's move away from these fairy tales, unconfirmed stories and mysticism of antiquity, and better understand what we know about these mushrooms now and from a scientific point of view. And we do know something, because scientific research on fly agarics also began at least since the 50s of the 20th century in America. And by the way, if it bothered you, then really according to medical reports from around the world, about the actual deaths from the use of fly agarics in the world almost nothing is known. Naturally, you can be poisoned by fly agaric mushrooms. They are really quite toxic and contain various conditionally poisonous substances, and in large quantities, especially in the raw form. This is just to eat them to die should be quite a lot, although to experiment with this, of course, we strongly advise you not to. But if you are directly interested, then for example, you certainly didn't know the fact that Wikipedia currently states that the lethal outcome, i.e. death in humans, should not occur before eating about 15 caps of fly agaric mushrooms even in raw form, and this is, you understand, extremely much for accidental poisoning. So in general, it is still not as dangerous as we were taught from childhood, but again, to check this fact, we also do not advise you. And the problem here is not only in the lethal outcome, but also in the fact that in reality, if you believe modern scientists and chemists, the use of such mushrooms in any case is dangerous, because at least even at an average dose can lead, and most likely will lead to a partial death of your brain cells, approximately as with the use of alcohol, if not worse. Many scientists, in fact, argue that it is because of this partial brain damage when using fly agarics that various hallucinogenic and other mystical effects occur. So another fact that the consumption of fly agaric mushrooms in large quantities definitely will not pass without a trace for your health and brain. But, on the other hand, most people willing to experiment on themselves with such, albeit conditionally, but really poisonous and toxic mushrooms do it, not for the sake of physical health, for treatment and stimulation purposes. As I hope you have already understood, very small dosages of this substance are usually used, while other experimenters expect some bright and amazing mystical experiences and even perhaps some insights. Moreover, quite a few people claim to actually get them. However, strange as it may seem, even these miraculous insights and revelations at the most successful outcome are still quite doubtful, because most of such storytellers, immediately after coming to themselves, forget almost everything that they saw and felt, and even what exactly they have learned for themselves from all of this. Therefore, as a self-development portal, we cannot recommend such dangerous experiments on ourselves. Most likely here, as well as everywhere else in self-development, it's more reasonable to act gradually and consciously, but this is another story. Well, in the meantime, to protect yourself from rash actions, you should remember that there are a huge number of species of fly agaric mushrooms. Some sources say that there are more than 600, but conventionally edible and even possibly useful of them are only a few. It is believed that the usualest common fly agaric, the first white spring fly agaric in general, is the most poisonous, but the red with white spots, even later, summer and autumn, and even prepared in a special way, may already bring the person in some good. So by default, unless you are an experienced shaman or a scientist with a thorough understanding of mushrooms, then in the direction of all other types of fly agarics is better not even to look. It really can be very dangerous. Well, we all know the mushroom from the pictures which we are talking about today, and which in science is called Amanita Muscaria. By assurances, even representatives of official medicine can bring a lot of benefits for health. Indeed, today medical corporations in many developed countries of the world use it as the basis for many modern medicines. Accordingly, the medical use of fly agaric is therefore permitted in the United States, Britain, Japan, Switzerland, Denmark, Canada, Norway, throughout the CIS and many other countries around the world. Of the known, the fly agaric seems to be banned in Arab countries, Israel and Australia, although this must be clarified, but in France, on the contrary, it is even part of the usual daily sleeping pills. But even this doesn't end its usefulness to humans. Fly agaric is used to kill insects and in the cosmetics industry, in various skin care products in the body, and in the format of microdosing, in special capsules, and minimal dosage of it even rumored recently began to use a lot of well-known businessmen and influential people in the world, and especially the US. And yes, in such cases in developed countries, businessmen are really not considered addicts or marginalized, because it is completely legal. In fact, they are not even trying to get any hallucinations or anything like that. They are just business people, and their interests here are quite prosaic and everyday. It was just noticed by someone and once that in a small concentration a fly agaric has not only a therapeutic, but also a banal tonic effect. That is, as we said earlier, can activate the body and its overall energy, improves health, immunity, balances the biorhythms of man, gives a generally positive attitude to life, and most importantly, trivial charge of strength and vivacity for the day. Well, it's certainly for such modern people not some inexplicable and mysterious forest magic of the Druids. Still, doctors and scientists have been working for the last years not in vain, and claim that this is because these mushrooms contain in large quantities such substances as ibotenic acid, muscarinic, muscimol and muscicin. And most of them are found only in these mushrooms, so in fact there are no analogues in nature to this plant. For example, muscarufins are the most memorable pigments of the fly agaric, or we can say the natural antibiotic that gives the fly agaric caps that color. Well, in its entirety, These substances in turn have similarities to the so-called GABA, one of the main neurotransmitters that regulate the work of the human brain and central nervous system. So, from the scientific point of view, all this isn't just a miraculous healing with mystical mushrooms, but rather just the result of the work of the psychoactive components of the fly agaric. We can say that they are natural coordinators of the human psyche. Therefore, it is important to apply them in the right proportions. So yes, in large quantities these substances cause hallucinations, but for many hard-working people in professions connected with intellectual work, it on the contrary, in small doses, replaces something like a mixture of positive vitamins and the usual energy drink. You could say an improved cup of coffee, only much more effective than regular coffee. After all, this in quotes super coffee, it can also help focus a person's attention on a single useful task and allow them to work on it for long periods of time without experiencing significant fatigue. And of course, which is also important, actually, with the help of it you can get rid of dependence on other more harmful stimulants, especially alcohol, smoking, antidepressants, drugs. The same, obviously not very useful, constant break for regular coffee. That is why microdosing is another concept that has recently been gaining explosive popularity and world renown in many developed countries of the world, as it really allows you to use such substances for your own benefit, while avoiding their negative effects. What is microdosing? In fact, microdosing is probably just the right tifac with which it is possible to maximize the benefits that this plant provides in the safest possible way. In simple terms, microdosing is the use of certain potent substances, but in very, very small amounts. And yes, it's mainly some substances that have any psychoactive effect, but in microdosing it turned out that many of them only help a person to concentrate his attention or get some other benefit, but negative effects like intoxication, hallucinations and the like, in general, everything that can harm health or intellectual activity, are not observed in this case.
Subscribe to the Summary Club and watch short versions of the most popular and useful videos every day.
Ideally, it is simply the ability to select such a dosage for yourself when the substance brings only benefit, while not clouding the mind and consciousness, but on the contrary, activating them even more. This is why lately the entire Silicon Valley, many programmers, managers, businessmen and other famous and influential people of the world have become interested in microdosing. Also, the microdosing of fly agaric can be referred to by another modern word, biohacking. After all, biohacking is essentially a process of improving yourself and your capabilities, both physical and intellectual, by some means. Usually it's either physical exercise or taking some kind of drugs. It is either chemical or natural, which are almost always more useful than their chemical counterparts. In fact, one of such recognized natural and practically harmless preparations for biohacking is the fly agaric microdosing, which we are talking about today, and which has been used for these purposes by herbalists around the world for many thousands of years. Well, in general, everything is actually quite simple. The fly agaric mushroom in large doses is really quite dangerous and neurotoxic. It can damage your brain, so no one can guarantee that nothing will happen to your mind and body after taking it, but at the same time it really is one of the most healing plants of the planet. As the famous Paracelsus liked to say that, in fact, almost all natural substances can be as deadly poisons and the best medicines, it's just a matter of the right dosage. So if you are not chasing super fast results, microdosing is a great choice for those who would like to use fly agarics for healing and spiritual purposes, but don't want to get poisoned and other possible side effects from the poisonous substances of this mushroom. It is generally believed that for the average healthy person, a dosage of half to 1 gram of fly agaric at a time poses absolutely no danger, or rather, we haven't even found any negative feedback on this, but if you have any, feel free to write about it in the comments. but so in general its microdosing of fly agaric can be conventionally considered a very safe and even useful activity for your body. Naturally, a lot depends on the capabilities of your body, your weight, height, health, and other features, but in general, this dosage is safe for any adult. And then you have to experiment with your well-being and the level of the desired effect on your own. On average, for microdosing it is recommended to take up to 1 gram of fly agaric 1 to 2 times a day, and the manufacturers of such products, so that you don't have to run into the woods yourself every day, just usually pack this mushroom powder in capsules of small weight so you can easily find the ideal dosage for you. As we said, you have to choose for yourself, because, indeed, according to reviews, fly agaric can act very differently on each person. Some people may be invigorated by it, like a near-perfect coffee, while others, in certain quantities, may be soothed and pacified by it. At the same time, a third person may not notice any significant effect and a rapid change in his or her well-being at all. In this regard, shamans and healers say that fly agaric, on the contrary, can itself adjust to the needs of your body, and rather overstressed in life, it will have a calming effect, and too relaxed will lead to the right working tone. But again, this is all theory, and only you can find out about yourself, because, unlike conventional drugs, almost everyone has a very different effect on fly agaric. In theory, fly agaric can be prepared by yourself, and we can even tell you a little secret that in dried form it is, by the way, less dangerous than in raw form, because there are some chemical processes and transformations of some substances into other ones. But we don't want to bore you with tedious chemistry. If you would be interested, you can read more about it even on Wikipedia. Well, again, by default, these mushrooms really at your own risk, which we certainly cannot advise you. You can make your own, but if you're afraid, or, like most ordinary people don't live close to an environmentally friendly forest, then today this isn't even a particular problem. Usually modern preparations for fly agaric microdosing look like a dry powder of various shades, most often gray-brown. It is also possible to buy fly agaric in the form of dried caps, vacuum-packed, or what is probably the most convenient for the urban man is already packed in strictly measured doses of gelatin capsules, which do not differ in appearance from any other medications. In this case, it is not so important in what form to use fly agaric in microdosing, they are almost equal and it's just a matter of convenience and your personal preferences. Again, what is important is the specific result that you want to get from it, which is still reported by many who have tried taking it in practice. And so, to summarize a little, according to the assurances of practitioners and manufacturers of fly agaric microdosing, after taking them, the blood pressure is equalized. It is not uncommon for low blood pressure increases, and for high blood pressure, on the contrary, it decreases. Also, the working properties of the immune system are improved, so the overall immunity and including the resistance to common seasonal diseases is increased. Often renal hepatic cramps and muscle spasms are eliminated. Intestinal and vascular parasites disappear. Joint pains are reduced, as fly agaric is often used in alternative medicine as a remedy exactly for this purpose. Headaches go away or are relieved. Sleep is normalized and insomnia is reduced. Sleep becomes deeper and more relaxing, bringing the body a good night's rest. A person's thinking becomes calmer, more consistent and concentrated. Symptoms of anxiety, irritability and chronic fatigue disappear. And general mental and emotional tension is also reduced if you already have an increased amount of stress and strain in your life. And this is only a more or less really verifiable and tangible effect directly on health, not to mention the fact that many businessmen substitute consumption of more harmful coffee, tea, energy drinks, antidepressants and even tobacco, alcohol and drugs with microdosing. And earlier healers of antiquity treated almost half of the diseases, including heart disease, epilepsy, seizures, tuberculosis and even impotence. But even with all this, most people are still interested in fly agaric, not just as a cure, but rather as a kind of plant power, which even more affect the person spiritually and helps him in various meditative and other conditionally mystical practices. It is common for seekers of spiritual truths to say that when taking a fly agaric, man becomes more sensitive to others and to external circumstances. Also, intuition and clairvoyance can increase tenfold compared to the previous indicators, if people engage in some practices to improve it. In addition, having solved the problem of insomnia and the subsequent stage of microdosing, many begin to see controlled or so-called conscious dreams. That in itself is the dream of a large number of practitioners of esotericism. Another thing, according to the reviews, microdosing fly agaric often gives a deeper meditation effect in the here and now moment if you are engaged in meditative practices or yoga. Finally, for the most advanced, a deeper sensory perception opens up, and most importantly there is stimulation of the pineal gland, epiphysis, the organ that, according to legends, connects the material and spiritual world, otherwise known in esoteric literature as the third eye. Hence, when man is ready, he may also have success in comprehending profound insights. In fact, that is what this plant is most often used for by shamans of the far north and many others. So if you summarize all the main properties of fly agaric, the main function and purpose of this plant in esoterics, healing and alternative medicine is that it just creates a kind of balance in the body, harmonizing the mind, body and spirit. That is, as a plant of strength, it tries exactly to harmonize the body. If a person has physical problems, then by normalizing, for example, sleep and blood pressure, and if he has more problems with unnecessary emotions and depression, then the medicine begins to work mainly as a soothing and calming agent. For those who are ready to go further, fly agaric begins to help in the spiritual search, developing intuition, the ability to meditate and other abilities. In theory, everyone will get exactly what they need at the moment most, and often, even regardless of their personal wishes, because they are in theory able to determine what your main problem is at the moment. In fact, this is approximately what happens in practice, because in fact most people reported that this plant acts very differently on most people. Someone just serves as a substitute for a cup of coffee and helps to improve working concentration, on the other hand, will have a calming effect, and someone will even help in spiritual practice. So the main recommendation for today, if you are really interested in this plant, it is necessary to try it, because it is impossible to predict 100% how it will affect you personally. For some people microdosing will have practically no visible effect, and for some people it can be a solution to many problems, both physical and psychological and even spiritual. Well, how this one of the most famous plant power will turn out for you personally, as they say, you can only find out in practice. As a postscript, it should be noted that we purposely tried not to overload this video with a huge amount of medical terms and details. Of course, we had to study a lot of sources in scientific nature, so it would be easy to write several pages just on this subject, but to be honest, at the end most doctors and scientists still cannot agree on how useful or harmful this mushroom. The fact is that many scientists are afraid of it like fire, although some microbiologists, botanists, chemists and anthropologists, on the contrary, have been studying it for decades and almost consider it their life's work. And even despite this, although scientists have already discovered many new chemical and molecular compounds available in nature exclusively in these mushrooms, but of course, so far have not been able to come close to its full unraveling. And yes, on the basis of fly agaric already produce a lot of medicines, also not a few people try to use it in large quantities on their own, sometimes even getting some insights, But such experiments can really be quite dangerous, whatever esoterics say, so all such actions you can perform only at your own risk. But microdosing is precisely the most rational and safe way to try the power and effect of this miraculous power plant. And yet even this effect varies greatly with hundreds and even thousands of contradictory reviews. Therefore it is very difficult for us as a self-development portal to speak about it authoritatively, because for someone it is practically zero, and for someone it's a whole miracle and a real salvation. So in the end we can only admit that the fly Agaric has really been able to keep its secrets for thousands of years. And yes, it does indeed rightfully occupy one of the highest places among the most famous mystical power plants, not inferior either in fame or in effects, to the same cactus peyote, or even ayahuasca, and many other similar substances. And unlike the latter, it's almost the only substance that is not yet banned by law and is allowed for legal purchase and use. So, if you are interested, you can try it without any fears, especially in the microdosing variant. And, of course, as always, we urge you, if you are going to experiment, to buy microdosing preparations only from proven manufacturers. Otherwise, as you understand, if you come across a counterfeit there are additional big risks for your health, and even banal not to get any effect at all and remain disappointed. That's why, just like last time, we'll leave a link in the video description to the online store of those guys we trust personally, and with whom we also consulted last time and this time while making the video. We hope your experience will be favorable and certainly safe if you do decide to experiment, and that is important. And, of course, you can also watch our other videos, including the rupee ceremonies, another one of these still permitted ways of biohacking and healing your body with jungle medicine. And of course, as usual, we have all the comments open, so honestly write your feedback, share your real experiences and impressions. After all, as it said, while science is still working with this red hat mystery, trying to unravel and put all the useful properties of Amanita Muscaria at the service of mankind, we already have the opportunity to touch the experience of ancient shamans and civilizations of the past right now. Well, as said the great Don Juan Matus from the stories of one of the most famous popularizers of such mystical experiences and practices, Carlos Castaneda, the beginning of the path coincides with intention and awareness. One must awaken and take responsibility for one's life. Without this there will be no road and no success. There are many obstacles ahead, the first of which is fear. A person will meet it without fail.
And friend, don't forget to subscribe to the Summary Club for becoming more successful, educated, kinder and wiser every day. Save hundreds of hours and dollars spending on boring regular education. Feel free to write your opinions and questions about each video. We read all the comments. In addition, go to our official website, where you can find reading materials or watch other videos on channel and links in the description. All the best.